So welcome everybody. My name is Jessa McLean. I'm the host of Blueprints of Disruption. We are a podcast, a weekly podcast, but we do occasionally do live streams like this and bring people together to have discussions on issues, but also on action. So that's what we're doing today. This is Fighting Legislated Poverty. I'm hoping some of you already know that disability programs across Canada are anything but supportive and are lacking in so many ways. The folks that we've brought together today will kind of develop on that. It goes beyond, not supplying enough money to disabled people that are unable to work. But these are provincial programs right now. Federal programs are also inadequate. Many of them play into that trope that disabled people just need help navigating into the workforce, so there's internship programs and other items that I'm sure help people, but it's certainly not addressing the legislated poverty of folks that absolutely cannot work and deserve to thrive. And we know that's what social services are for, our safety net. I'd like to believe also that the urgency around this issue has been heightened because of the discussion around MAID. A lot of the stories that have come out now, that is assisted dying. And we've had a lot of discussion amongst the disabled community about offering that as a solution before any adequate supports. And it's kind of pushed this into the spotlight a little bit, just how difficult it is to live off of these provincial programs. Now, we've brought a great panel together. We're going to let them introduce themselves so that I don't get anything wrong. They're going to tell us who they are, if they're part of an organization. We have a spectrum of people here that do various levels of organizing. We're also going to hear their motivators, why they're doing what they're doing and the way that they're doing it. We'll talk about ableism, which is often the elephant in the room, but it plays a big role in shaping these programs that we're talking about, right? Why that they're the way that they are, but also in why this isn't part of a wider discussion, why disability rights are often left out of bigger movements that often focus on worker issues, right? Even in progressive spaces, there's a lot of work to do around disability justice. So we have folks that are experienced in working in these progressive spaces, and we can hear maybe some of the barriers that are there or some of the work that needs to be done as well. So, we want to explore ways we can fight back against this legislated poverty, because that's what it is. Together, check in with folks so you can chime in the comments. We'll try to work it into the discussion, make connections here. I don't know if all of our panelists have met before, but they have now. So hopefully we can grow the network of folks working on this. And so again, if you could boost the live stream, that would be great. And you can always catch more of our content on anywhere you catch your podcasts. So that's Blueprints of Disruption. Okay, the panel. So I can stop talking and get some water. So I'm going to go to Rabia first, I've got a list of guests here. So Rabia, can you please introduce yourself to the audience here?
Okay, good evening. My name is Rabia Khedr. I'm the National Director of Disability Without Poverty. I'm also involved in many other ways with disability rights just through my lived experience. I'm the CEO of Dean Support Services and one of the founders of the Race and Disability Canada project. I'm talking to you from Mississauga, Ontario, Canada, most recently the traditional territories of the Mississaugas of the New Credit. I identify myself with a one-liner, and that goes something like this. I'm Rabia Khedr. I'm a hyphen with many hijabs. I am a Muslim, Punjabi, Pakistani, Canadian woman, wife, mother, sibling of individuals with intellectual disabilities and other disabilities, daughter of aging parents, activist, advocate, community person, yada, 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 and I happen to have a disability. I am blind. And that, I guess, would be my greatest recognition is my identity marker around intersectionality. I've also served as a commissioner with the Ontario Human Rights Commission in the past, chaired and served on various accessibility advisory committees and standards committees. I've also served on Accessibility Standards Canada, and I'm on Minister Carla Qualtrough's Ministers Disability Advisory Group, which emerged out of COVID.
Well, I'm glad you introduced yourself because I would have left one of those hyphens out, I'm sure. As we get into the discussion, we'll talk about a little bit more maybe about the motivators behind your work, but I do appreciate your time, Rabia, and we'll be sure to share the links to your organization as we go along. Kamal, can you please introduce yourself to everyone?
Absolutely, yeah. My name is Kamal. My pronouns are he, him. I have ADHD and a hearing cognition disability. I also work in web accessibility for my work as a software engineer, and I'm an executive of the Ontario ONDP and co-chair of the Disability Committee. And I'm speaking from Toronto, Ontario. Thank you.
Thank you. Christine, and then we'll go to Isabella.
Hello, I'm Christine. Pardon me. I was just sitting thinking what or how I would introduce myself. I am early retired from the field of work that I did because of disability, essentially, which is I also hold a part of the roles that I held responsible for the mental health stuff that I deal with today. My professional I was somebody who worked in systems for 28 years. I spent 15 almost in an inpatient psychiatric unit as social worker and counselor. And then I did a little bit of grassroots stuff locally in Owen Sound, helped get a peer crisis support worker program as the peer crisis worker myself off the ground in the emergency department locally here. So I have my professional experience for sure, but why or who and or what motivates me? I've always been a person who, it wasn't just books and studying for me. I've always been somebody who believes in speaking out and change. My daughter became disabled a few years ago. She was struck by an SUV. And I understood to that point what ableism and disability and oppression was because I learned about it. But I'm also a very privileged person in our society. So it was mostly through learning and observing, right? Friends. I never had experience with my daughter, what happens personally to somebody who becomes disabled in our society. I live with disability myself now, and I still get turned inside out emotionally. I'm still healing and recovering some stuff. That's where my motivator is, because being a person that was in systems that did my best to, I like your rabble rouse, right? And still keep my job. Coming out the other end. Some of what you might see that I do is on social media. And that's kind of the route I've chosen for now in terms of activism and getting lived experience out and advocacy out there, because I'm disturbed. I always have been, but I
By what you're seeing?
Oh yeah.
And experiencing?
Yeah. Yep. And again, with somebody like myself who I'm in sub-poverty, right? It's shaken my soul. I'll just say that, through the experiences with my own child, and then all the people I served over the years. So I hope that makes sense, but that's kind of me in a nutshell. And I have 2 cats.
we can't forget about the cats. Kamal also has
No,
a new
I
cat.
know, you
Shout
see
out
them
to the
all the time.
cats.
So I'm grateful
But
to be here, and thank you for that.
thank you. Christine, I'm sure that resonates with a lot of people. You talk about it making sense. You know, it doesn't have to make sense to everybody, but your experiences is valid. Isabella, tell us about yourself.
Hi, my name is Isabella Gamk. I'm the founder of Proof Protecting ODSP-OW Funding. I started the group in 2018 specifically to demand that ODSP and OW be doubled. Since then, our demands have changed a few times. Our current demands are that the ODSP shelter allowance be quadrupled, the ODSP basic needs allowance be doubled, and the OW basic needs and the shelter allowances be increased by 150%. So doubled in half. And I ran for mayor last year of Toronto, and I'm going to run again this year. You know, vote Isabella Gamk for Toronto Mayor 2023. It's the right thing to do. I fight because the struggle was just getting to be too much. I had opened a bank account and tried to save money, you know, and I worked my way up to saving money and end up getting a credit card, but then trying to keep up with credit card bills because our money wasn't going up enough. And, you know, I was kept having to dip into use it to make ends meet. You know, I had savings up till then. I used up the savings. You know, like I was struggling for 5 years, about 5 years or more before I started Proof, like really struggling. You know, I have dietary issues and you know, I'm lactose free and gluten free, and I use a FODMAP diet to try to control my IBS and gluten and my severe acid reflux and stuff. I have a damaged esophagus and Bear's disease. So, you know, food is expensive, and the food banks don't
Even
really
more
carry
so
it.
now.
Food banks don't really carry anything I can use, you know, maybe a couple of soft potatoes or, you know, carrots or something, but, you know, that's not really healthy, and it's not really enough to go stand in line for, you know, for 2 hours or something, you know. It's just,
We're not rabbits. Like
we
have to
shouldn't have to stand in line for, you know, disabled people shouldn't have to stand in line for 2 hours in the wintertime or in the summertime to beg food. You know, I have to ration my food as it is. You know, it's just, you know, I was interviewed during the Trans March in 2018 in July or something, and, you know, they asked me about trans rights, and I said, you know, there's lots of people fighting for trans rights. I said the real issue was ODSP and OW, the struggle people are having with that. And it was like 2 or 3 months later, I started Proof, like on September 15th, you know. So
And Poof
you
is
know,
also a network, right? Of
well,
disabled activists or disabled folks.
yeah, I'm in touch with a lot of groups. Other groups, you know, Socialist Action has helped us a few times with some of our protests. Some members of OCAP and some members of ACORN come out. I was a member of OCAP. They kicked me out. They didn't agree with my demands. You know, they kept wanting to fight for more shelters and affordable housing, and people are on ODSP and OW can't afford affordable housing. You know, so we don't need everybody to end up in shelters. 4 years ago, Income Security Advocacy, when I contacted them and asked them about the numbers of how many people on ODSP and OW were in subsidized housing, they told me that 12% of people on ODSP and 7% of people on OW were living in subsidized housing. Last year, when I ran for mayor, I emailed them again and I asked for the new current numbers. And they told me last fall that there was only 9% of people on ODSP and 5% of people on OW living in subsidized housing. The numbers went down. So even though more subsidized housing has been added to the system than has been taken away, you know, due to repairs needs or whatever, you know, more units have been added, but less people on ODSP and OW are living in subsidized housing. So that means that everybody else is ending up on the streets or dead from, addictions or whatever else. You know what I mean? But it's not right. I don't know where we're headed, but this is why I fight. It's not good. It's not right. It's too much ableism. Only, all this narrative about people, trying to push disabled people to work. There was an article on the news the other day. Only 5% can or do work. 5% of disabled people. So 95% can. And this rhetoric, everybody's trying to push programs and work programs, and it's total ableism. And it's got to stop. I worked until my doctor decided that I should go on disability. It was a doctor's, that's recommended that I go on disability because I couldn't do it anymore.
And just because your doctor recommends it doesn't necessarily mean you'll be approved for the support programs either. Is that because?
Well, some people do apply 2 or 3 times, but there's a thing, unfortunately, there's a misconception that people think that if they're on OW long enough, they automatically or they're going to end up on ODSP, and that's not how it works.
Yeah,
you have to. Yeah, there's I think that when somebody goes into a shelter, if they aren't on ODSP already, they should be diagnosed by a mental health professional and a physical doctor, to see whether or not they belong on ODSP, and then stop the nonsense saying that, no, this person's okay to work when they actually aren't.
Yeah.
There's no sense putting them in there and then saying, you can work when they really can't,
Yeah. Give me a second, Isabella. Sorry. You brought up a few, demands that POOF has specific to ODSP that go beyond, doubling the rates, which is what I think most people hear, right? It was part of the Ontario provincial campaign a little bit eventually. But
yeah, how much work it was? Do you know how much work it was? It took me 2 years to get other groups and politicians to stop demanding the 3% be reinstated.
Yeah,
I heckled them. Now a lot of politicians and groups hate me because I call out the ableism. Instead of changing their demands so they aren't ableist, they would rather hate me and block me.
All right, let me get to my question, Isabella, so we can get other panelists in on here. Okay. It's all good. I know everyone loves to chat and there's so much to talk about. But you brought up some other demands, because I think there's a far more wrong with everyone here's in Ontario. So I didn't do a good job of going national, but we've got a lot of input from folks that very similar programs are in place, very similar restrictions. One of them, for example, is the lack of marriage equality that exists under ODSP and what happens when people start to cohabitate and the clawbacks that happen. But there are perhaps other things that about ODSP and similar programs that also need changing. Do folks, Isabel, so just hold tight here, because you already named some really good ones. I'm wondering if anybody else can think of reforms that are critical, specific to the provincial programs. I know a lot of people they're federal solutions, and we will get to those, but what else is wrong with ODSP?
It's too hard to get things. They don't
get approved or especially for quality of life.
They want to try to say that, if it's not totally medically necessary, you don't get it. But we are supposed to have quality of life, and it's supposed to be implemented into the ODSP system.
So if you needed medical devices or something
I couldn't do half of what I do if I didn't get my wheelchair, because I can still walk some. I can walk around the block with my dogs. That's about it. But I couldn't go to protests and everything else if I didn't have my wheelchair. I couldn't go to other programs and meetings, at different various organizations if I didn't have my wheelchair.
I think a lot of people would assume things that are medically necessary are covered by OHIP, but we see in clawbacks and delisting of services a lot. But I think a lot of people would be surprised that mobility devices and other basic accommodations, if that's the right word, are something that is extra. That's something you have to go to like a caseworker and make an argument for. Christine, I saw you unmute yourself there. Do you are there other aspects to ODSP?
Can I finish for 2 seconds? 2 seconds, quick.
All right.
Okay. We need to have money for people to go out. There should be a budget for entertainment money. And the ODSP should also be organizing or having some another agency that organizes outings for people that are disabled. They have places where they have heated pools. Well, if I want to use one, I have to pay. You know what I mean? That's the only. I can't swim in a regular pool, but I have zero body fat. I get cold in 10 seconds in a pool.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Okay.
But and the other, yeah. So
let's hear from Christine.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I just was going to say, just some thoughts popping in my head. The barriers that exist continued ongoing with ODSP are quite obvious, right? Legislated poverty. I hope you don't mind, but I do use terms like social murder.
That's what it is. Yeah,
it is. And so things that I can remember just from my work experience, for example, they would talk, an ODSP or rep would come into the hospital to talk to inpatients, right? This was when I was in the peer role, and people can't, even access a cell phone. So, and I remember raising the question with the peers to the workers saying, so how exactly, we can't even pay rent. So there's one issue, number one. But how about, phone access, cell phones, something like that. And this was like 3 or 4 years ago. And the worker themselves said, I know it's a problem. I thought, if somebody's disabled, and let's say they're with a device at home and they fall and they have no phone because they can't afford it. Where in the system were these things excluded, and what, and why, right?
Yeah.
This is not new. So I also want to comment on, again, just with, luckily I had some skill, right, in terms of advocacy in the system. But I can tell you that when I worked with people on the inpatient unit who were declined ODSP and they had major disability, I would be the one, the social worker comes in. I learned became a craft, how to get somebody approved. And I remember thinking back then, there's I shouldn't be here doing this. The idea of this role was to work myself out of a job. But again, the barriers around just the application process.
And those are growing, right? Like now,
it's
confirmed that they are living in Ontario every 30 days or their payments will stop. And like, what if you don't understand that? What if you, like ADHDers will forget. They will forget until it's too late. And then what are you going to, like a caseworker to explain or?
OW is only 7 days.
Yeah, like.
It's by design.
It's incredible. I think folks, and that I think people can start to appreciate how difficult it is to organize in such circumstances against it, right? Where we have other issues that have well-funded organizations or unions, where your job is to actually advocate for, you're paid to advocate for folks, but this requires like extra resources that aren't there. Just to speak to that, we originally were going to do this at the end of January, and that was my lack of knowledge there around the lived experience on ODSP. And a comrade came and said, this is the hardest month for folks on social disability payments. They get an early December payment to accommodate for Christmas, whatever. And then it's like a month and over a month before the next payment, right? Through a very expensive time of year, typically. And to ask folks,
we used to actually get $100 Christmas bonus at one time,
and they took that away. Like
they took that away. Yeah, I
It's
mean, yeah, that was meant so we could buy family gifts and whatnot. You know what I mean?
yeah. That,
So,
and
you know what I mean? So that we didn't feel like a real heel at Christmas time. So,
but that speaks to like living that fuller life that you were talking about, like an
right, yeah,
entertainment fund, a
right.
dietary needs met, you know, like not having to beg for everything. I want to transition a bit just so we can kind of have a well-rounded oh, Kamal, please. Thank you for
Yeah,
raising your hand and make sure you get in there.
I have a little bit of a less specific feedback on this because
Yes.
basically what I'm noticing is that the problem is, well, there are issues and I do expect more to come up, but I think strategically the way which the consultation is for these programs is not with people in the programs. They consult everybody, doctors, economists, even family, but they don't, and then they wonder like, why is it not working? Why, like, but they're not actually consulting actual disabled people.
That
well,
happens a
actually,
lot,
because they
doesn't
don't,
it? Not
Yeah.
just.
because they don't want the public to know the truth.
That's right.
There's
And
also
maybe-
a sense of ableism and paternalism.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, because you know, if the public knew the truth, then the ableism would have to stop.
Well, that would be
Maybe,
nice.
so maybe I can
Rabia,
chime
yeah.
in here as well.
Please.
And I'm sorry, I'm not really good at using the hand gesture. I'll just
I'll keep
unmute
that in mind. I'm going to
and
make sure
jump
we.
in. So, you know, with like programs like ODSP, the problem is they're designed to meet a need that's been defined by somebody, but to meet a need at a very minimalist way. And the goal is keep people out, not let people in. Right. So the whole system is structured at how do we weed people out? Not so when you apply, it's about screening you out as opposed to screening you into the program. So it's like almost like, you know, there's the letter of the law and then there's the intent. The intent is to keep you out. So that one is a problem. Now, when you're talking about like, you know, sending out payments early in December, why, if you're not giving anybody extra money? And why not? Not everybody celebrates Christmas. Like I mean, I'm not out buying Christmas gifts for my family. I don't celebrate Christmas. So if I were on ODSP and you give me that money in advance,
Yeah,
that's just, you know, misleading me for the time that I have to fill in, right? Like I understand January being a difficult month for many people for many other reasons, plus money. But the only reason they're pushing the money out faster is because they're closed between Christmas and New Year's. As opposed
was I
to
giving them
doing
too much
anybody any
credit,
favors.
Rabia?
Yeah.
You know,
Sorry.
like rather than doing anybody any favors, like,
Yeah.
you know, they're just pushing it out because it's just, you know, got to get
easier
the
for
job
them.
done so we can
Easier
shut
for
down
them, right?
government that week, right? And for me, like, again, supporting people, I'm supporting newcomers with, you know, who've acquired disabilities. And again, it's our ableist mindset, the way we view what disability poverty looks like. There's a misnomer out there that people with disabilities get everything. So ODSP covers like everything and everything else is covered. We know that that's further from the truth across the country, across various disability specific or other social support programs. And you know, when like, for example, I was talking to somebody this week and I said, you know, this person needs financial help, they're in debt, you know, maybe we can contribute something. And the first reaction this person had was, oh, but they had a pretty good car. And I'm like, okay, you are privileged in, you know, upper middle class, and you're looking at somebody who's, you know, on OW right now, trying to get onto ODSP and saying, oh, but their car? Like, what do you mean? You know
what?
And that's the same attitude. I'm sorry, Isabella, just give me a chance.
No worries.
Okay?
No worries.
That is exactly the attitude that then infiltrates how the system is designed, right? It's people's understanding of, you know, like somebody explained to me recently, they said, you know, poverty is about giving people what they need to thrive. Thrive doesn't mean to live in abundance. Thrive means to live with basic dignity. And, you know, nationally, we know that there are gaps across this country. There are 52 different poverty lines across this country. Disability poverty lines are anywhere from 40 to 63% above that ableist poverty line. and disability supports are at least 40% below that poverty line. So-
Sorry, just to clarify, the
Do you know what the
actual,
biggest problem
hold on,
is?
hold
The
on. I
biggest-
just want to get a point of clarification, Isabella. So the actual needs are 40% more than what we declare poverty, which
Yes,
so many
because-
programs are then based on, right?
Yes.
Housing, all
living
kinds of
with-
things.
And living with a disability costs more. But provincial supports for people with disabilities
This
are
is the
below
problem.
that by 40%.
Okay, but this is
So
the
Toronto,
biggest
for
problem.
I'll
is
go
the
to you,
terminology.
Isabella, I promise.
Okay.
Toronto, for example, is the poverty line is just over $2,000. The official poverty line is just over $2,000.
And that's not true.
A
And that's
person
not
with
true.
a disability in Ontario, on ODSP is getting $1,227.
28.
Varies.
But you know what? The problem is, the biggest problem is the terminology. Is because they use support. Before it was assistance. The support and assistance implies that we have another source of income. For many people on disability support benefits, it's their only source of income. So right away they mislead the public to say that it's a support or it's assistance, like we have some other way of getting money. It's an ableist term, and that we have to get the terminology changed because it's not right. It should just be an income. A disability income.
Well, when
but not a support. It shouldn't say support or assistance because it's not. For many of us, it's our only source of income, or you know what I mean. There is no other support. There is no other assistance. Families don't help. My family don't help. Nothing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, it definitely words and language matters.
But
and
that's what leads up to the public thinking that, you can do this, you can do that. If this is just a support program, that must mean you can work. You know what I mean?
Let's talk about that a little bit more because we had someone in the chat share a bit of lived experience there that the messaging that goes around some of these programs and the insistence that folks just need to get a job is actually traumatizing. There's like an emotional impact and a psychological impact, not just on the people who need assistance or supports or whatever income, but also on the general public who then either decide to advocate for better programs or not, right? So it plays into their maybe ambivalence, but I love that a few advocates always remind me that we're all just like one accident, one illness away from being disabled. I'm myself neurodivergent. I don't like talking about it, but that's besides the point. But, my husband is he's on disability. He was lucky to be in a union that had insurance, but I mean, that's going to run out for sure. And I'm pretty confident that support programs are not going to be there or be adequate. But I think everyone needs to understand, like, you're very close to being in that situation. This is a crisis that nobody can really ignore. And I'm often frustrated.
That's number 4. That's number 4 question.
Oh, I didn't promise I'd go in order. Okay.
That really has to do with number 4 because that's how you got to be able to get other people to prioritize. And I've tried to do that with unions. I pointed it out to union members at other protests. I've spoken at other protests where there's been lots of union members. You know what I mean? And I've invited them out to our protests. I've went to OPSU. I've handed them things. I've emailed QP. I've emailed the teachers union. I've emailed different unions, and they just ignore us. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They you know what, it doesn't affect me, I guess. You know what I mean? Like they don't want to see that it could happen to them. They don't, the unions don't even tell their members that. You know what I mean? That's sad.
Yeah, I think
the unions should be making sure that their members fight to keep disability benefits up because workman's comp runs out, workman's comp that gets denied, people end up on disability.
WSIB is also like another episode altogether, but I think Kemal can also attest to even within progressive circles that can represent anybody that maybe aren't beholden to workers, like their workers, it's hard getting disability rights at the forefront. People don't even want to say the word disabled. I think of the long-term care home narrative that was just seniors, our grandparents, like erasing the fact that everyone is in there because they're disabled, not of their age, right? And
so many times we have town halls, and sorry, Christine, I'm just going to be brief. So many times there's town halls, and like, I literally find out because of social media, and then
oh no,
and that's the only way that I sneak in our disability activists into those town halls. But
you're giving away your secrets, Kamal.
I mean, honestly,
one of our big problems is misled activists.
I'm sure.
And sometimes I think they're government plans. Like they don't understand. Like and the media loves it because these people are asking for housing, for the homeless people. Except for the homeless people ain't getting it. A lot of the homeless people were kicked out of housing. They get back in. Like the numbers, ISAC, the numbers show that people on ODSP and OW, there's less of them in subsidized housing now than 4 years ago. So the people that are advocating for housing for their homeless are not helping the homeless. They're helping the low-income working families. Yeah. Toronto housing is becoming
sorry, guys.
only for low-income
did you
working
finish your
families.
thought? Because I got lost.
Okay.
Kind of. I was just saying that, well, it's always difficult because like we're not thought of, like I kind of mentioned it briefly before, but basically that like for spaces when disability issues are present, I mean, disability issues are present in all levels that I deal with. But oftentimes, as you said, like whether it's long-term care, even education, all these things, there's disability related issues there, but we're not always invited or thought of, even though we are relevant. And because of that, our opinions are not actually even able to be present.
That's true.
You're absent. I'm going to let Christine, you had your I'm sorry, I didn't see your hand there.
That's okay.
Your white hand blended in with the white wall.
And me, I'm just, I jotted down a couple things. My brain just goes in bunny trails everywhere. One thing around, in terms of in systems and stuff like that, what I can tell you in my own experience now working in mental health, and I, living with my own mental health stuff and that, all the years that I worked in that arena, it was always like, oh, the disability is handled somewhere else. That's oh yeah, right.
The diversity and inclusion meetings that go nowhere.
Right. And when it got really loud was after what happened with Haley, my daughter, who gives consent, by the way. She's cool. This is our story too, right? When everything kind of went down with her, I gap out a little bit with that still. I really learned, I remember saying, through the years that I worked in the system, especially when I worked in inpatient psychiatry, that why is there this black hole? So what do we do? And how do we help somebody who's living with mental health, disability, poverty, right? Oh, there's really nowhere, so what would happen?
There needs more better supportive housing with
well, and
24-hour staff.
It's a huge issue, so when somebody ends up in that situation, what I learned personally with my daughter is, again, it's not just a mysterious kind of, it's excluded. It's just not available. So help or supports or however we look at it. Because I used to just, even as a worker, go around and think, they tell me, get this housing for this person. And I come back, where? I did that for years, right? I also told people the wait list for housing was 5 years, over 28 years. And that never changed.
I waited 20 years for housing.
Right. So none of it ever changed. So with that, I guess my point is that it's just simply not dealt with. And that's my take on it as somebody who's been working in systems. There's fanfare and window dressing and
You
all
know,
that kind of fun stuff, but nothing tangible ever comes. So, because here we are in 2023. The other piece I wanted to mention was that as a person who, in my own lived experience, I had money for time, right? Because I was working in these jobs and all this kind of stuff. But the truth of the matter is, when disability happens, right, like it did to my daughter, which dealing with systems broke the or not her dad and I have been apart years, but broke down our systems in the family. Like her dad's not able to work anymore because he's not. It was all related to this, all of it, all of the come down, right? For her, for us. For myself personally, what I can say, and when I tried to do some advocacy last year, I felt like I had no business doing disability advocacy because they pounded it in our heads in the systems. Oh, it's not disability, it's differently abled. That's what I
a
used to
really
hear.
bad term. That's a
Oh,
really
I
bad
know.
term.
Yeah,
Oh,
no, I can
I
see
know.
everyone
So,
cringe when you
yeah,
say
right.
that.
So, but from as somebody from the inside speaking freely on the outside now, it's crushing. And I know that from my own personal experience, with my diet changes, because I do have chronic disease that requires certain things to eat. My diet has dramatically changed. My health is not getting better. I find it challenging because I can't eat good, healthy food. So the advocacy I tried to do last year to try to show people, look at, hey, I'm a fallen, whatever you want to call me from the systems. And I'm letting you know, what everybody's been saying for a real long time is really true. When we can't eat properly and when we're scared to death about where we're going to live, I'm somebody who knows how to navigate systems. Do you know what I mean? So that's where I would get so, people don't want to see it. I don't know what it is, but I can say, I'll just touch on that. The whole MAID issue, I started advocacy around that last year, was floored to find out people in systems had no idea of the changes and thought I was crazy, basically. And I'm still trying to put all this together and put myself together. But as somebody who did not live in abject legislated poverty my entire life, I can tell you the damage that has already happened to me from a mental health angle, just navigating living in sub-poverty, because I get CPPD, I have no savings or assets, nothing. The pension's gone, I spent it. So do you see what I mean? So I guess I'm just giving that as a frame of reference as an individual who you see sitting.
I think one of the biggest issues is the government needs to change their attitude. And, this is where we need the public to be educated about the reality, because the politicians mislead the public by calling us frauds and cheats and scammers and whatever else.
Yeah.
They like to see the homeless but they never say that the homeless are ODSP and OW clients and that they're failed, that the ODSP and OW is failing them. This is at City Hall. I was at City Hall yesterday with my wheelchair. Person pointed out the wheelchair accessible washroom, and they had to hold the door open for me because there's no button. And then the stall that was supposed to be for the wheelchair, I could hardly turn my wheelchair in. And then when I did turn it around, there was no room to hardly move to use the toilet. You know what I mean? So City Hall does this. You know what I mean? Queens Park ain't much better. It took them forever just to get a ramp in.
That does speak to the mindset of government, but I think we all realize that governments are shaped by our attitudes, right?
This is why we do protests, and this is why I'm finding that protests at Queens Park and City Hall and on the sidewalks don't do anything, because the people don't really pay attention. The people pay attention when you block the street. And you know what? They'll stop and they'll pull out their phone. Sometimes they'll stand there for 2 hours videoing, you know what I mean? Which means they're sharing it, you know what I mean? So that's getting out even farther because the media ain't sharing where our stories are, it's hard though, because we have to fight with the traffic. We can't get enough people out, so it's very hard. The police come and get in our face. But when you're at Queens Park, you're just preaching to the choir. You're there for 2 or 3 hours, and then there's a 5-second blurb on the news that doesn't really explain anything. So, like that's just, to me, it's turning out to be a waste of time going to Queen's Park, because you don't get, the public aren't hearing the problem. The only way the public can hear the problem is if we block the street and tell them. You know what I mean? That's
I'm nodding along. This is Blueprints of Disruption. So yeah, we're clearly, when we work within the confines provided to us, like they're there for a reason.
Even during a march, the public see the march, but they don't understand what is going on.
Yeah.
Because even if you're chanting something by, they're not getting the whole scenario, the picture, what's it about. So that's why I think to block a street for 2 or 3 hours, it takes you an hour to get for the cops to show up and then back the traffic off enough so that there's nobody standing right beside you honking a horn. You know what I mean? We fight with that all the time.
Let's go to Kemal for a second. He's got his hand up.
Yeah.
I did a protest last year while I was running for mayor, and I blocked Wellesley Street East in front of the ODSP OW office to demand more money for poor and disabled people. Other mayor candidates were there. Other councillor candidates were there. Everybody notified the media, and I was running for mayor, and no media showed up. This, 1% don't want us to be heard.
That's why independent media is here. Kemal, you had your hand up there, and then I'm gonna quiz you a little bit from the chat.
Sure, yeah. So I think that, and we're talking about like the stigma that is being enforced, and it's not just enforced by the politicians, also by people and by the media. And I think that a lot of this is basically saying that people don't have value unless they can do full-time employment. And that's I think one of the things that I have a huge issue with, because there's so much value to, a number of reasons. One of them is that there's so much value to work outside of employment. Like when we say the word work, we don't, it does not necessarily mean employment, because you can still be a volunteer, you can still do contract work at that, or you could be a family caretaker, and that is still very valuable work.
You can run a group,
or a student. You could run a group, yeah. And before I go into like the issues there, I also have to say, like, not everybody can work. Like, people don't realize, they think that everybody on these programs can do work even a little bit, and
nobody's going to give up their job to go on these programs when the whole check won't cover rent.
No, and even if they could, there's so many current ableist issues within that. Like, full-time work is just not always set up properly, whether there's because there's a minimum output per time that people have to have. So even if you have times when you are capable, or things are unpredictable, or you have to take lots of breaks, these are like unprofessional standards that we're forced to abide by. And like, I know lots of people who are on ODSP who are just not able to work because they cannot fit within this confine. And yeah, so, but again, like, not everybody can work, and I think that should not be used against us. Yeah.
And that's really interesting. There was something we were involved with, ironically, with a very conservative group, a Christian think tank, Cardis, and they produced a report called "Work is More Than Money," and that's fundamentally it. Like, for people as human beings, we want to be involved, we want to contribute, we want to be productive, but it may not be conventional productivity under employment. It may not be that kind of capitalist money-making kind of machinery, productivity. So you're absolutely right, Kemal. Volunteer work, caregiving, all those factors contribute to being a contributing member of your of a family, of a community, of a society. And there's another element, like, because of the disability related barriers that people face, they may not be able to work enough hours to support themselves. They may not be able to attain the kind of work that pays enough for them to have an okay quality of life. And then there are folks who have intellectual or developmental disabilities, or have very significant complex disabilities that actually, even if they wanted to work, they can't, but they don't even understand the concept of work. What about folks who can't voice for themselves, who can't work? Are we just going to say, hey, you only deserve poverty all your life because you were born with a serious disability? You're going to live a life of poverty? Is that the kind of values we have as a society? So I think it's really, really, talking to the average person in society who's able-bodied today, helping them recognize that they can be disabled tomorrow, that this is one sort of grouping of humanity, categorization or demographic or whatever you want to call us, community, that every single able-bodied person has the potential of becoming a part of due to accident, illness, aging, whatever, right?
Yes, I had a friend
what
became
supports are we
schizophrenic.
Hold on,
gonna
Isabella.
have?
Let Rabia finish.
What supports are we going to have in place when you're able-bodied today and tomorrow you're disabled? You might need those. And also to ask ourselves, folks, with severe developmental disabilities, significant disabilities, like, are we, as a first world nation, are we saying that they don't have the right to thrive? Are we saying that, they only deserve to live well below the poverty line? We're not going to support them because they're obviously incapable of working. I'm being sarcastic there a little bit.
I could hear it.
Yeah.
No, I appreciate that point. I wanted to kind of quiz Kemal. I promised I would. So hold on a second, Isabel, because the chat lit up at the discussion of the Ontario NDP. Obviously, I know you, Kemal, you're in there. You can see it, and like I've spoken to a lot of people on ODSP and other provincial programs that rest a lot of hope in getting an NDP government as the solution, right? As the only way to manifest real transformative change on these programs. And it's a matter of survival, right? Like, as we discussed here, like it's not just.
I'm not impressed though.
No, I know. Hold on, Isabel. I'm gonna let Kemal kind of talk to this just because of his position, but happy to let folks opine on it. And you'll see in the chat that most people are actually skeptical. I mean, they tuned into this program, so we've been very clear with our disappointment as well. Hold on, please. You're gonna have to stop talking over people, Isabella.
I'm sorry. I have a short-term memory loss, and you know what? 2 minutes later, I can't remember what I was going to ask. That's why I interject. I'm sorry.
All right, it's all good. It's all good. So, Kemal, you're inside there, right? You mentioned you're the co-chair of the Disability Committee.
Yeah, I mean, okay. So what I'll say first is, because I know that this can be divisive, but I want to share people, like, before I even talk about it, that like be critical. Like I'm not here to, like, I won't get offended by what you say. Like, you just have to say what's
you don't have to tell me that, but
no, I know. So what I wanted to say was, like, obviously I have high hopes. I'm still there that like that we will, that if the party is even able to become the governing party, that we do implement the appropriate measures. I don't know what that would look like. I mean, I would obviously fight like hell personally internally, but like we would still have to be, everyone here would still have to be doing exactly what we're doing today to make sure that we hold those folks accountable and that they know what the timeline is, that this is a crisis, and not everyone will see that. Although, like, I think maybe by the end of, I can't say how long things will take, but it's still going to be a struggle. And I think one tricky thing that I've seen, like, we look at other provinces and they will have also had NDP governments, and like they have things promised to them that they don't always get. And I think that provinces because this is one of the questions, number 3 technically, which was like,
The audience doesn't know what we're talking about when we talk about these questions.
it's okay.
just like a heads
Anyways,
up to the panel.
like the provinces will, like governments of provinces will look to other provinces as the standard. They may go a little bit above what the other ones do, but typically
well, that's
they
horrifying.
don't. No, I'm just saying.
No,
like,
I know, but
that's
it's like
right.
such a low bar.
It is, and
Yeah.
they will may go a little bit above what the others do, but typically they don't go too far above, and that's a tough thing, is that even until we see some provinces get to an adequate level, even like we will not be able to see the federal government even start to talk about that. So but yeah, like personally I think like our committee is really strong this time around, and I think like we have been able to hold many things to account, especially like the priority things. So like changing the policy before the election, like we kicked butt there. So eventually we did, like when they started listening to us. So
Yeah,
but,
like people were mortified at that suggestion of a 20% increase to ODSP when that didn't even undo the Mike Harris cuts, right? And this was
No,
coming
it's
from
awful.
their what they thought was their most progressive choice, but alas, the Greens outflanked them, thankfully, and ended up bringing, I think that played a lot into it too, like not minimizing your work or Isabella's work on getting folks to come around to the double, but Mike Schreiner kind of set the bar there for progressives where
Because I talked to him. That's because of me.
Isabella's going to take full credit for this.
There was no other group in 2018 or even up to 2020 asking for ODSP and OW to be doubled. I started that in 2018.
That was just like too ambitious, you think? Like
that was
why
too ambitious. OCAP
right.
said no. They wouldn't sign the letter. Other people wouldn't sign the letter. They wanted me to put down a substantial increase instead of saying double. I ran into such trouble with Acorn and everybody, and this is the thing, the NDP in 2018 they talked about a 27% increase over 3 years. And that's what they were going to do again in 2020. In 2022. And, it's only because of Mike Schreiner that he agreed to double that. And even then, we had already upped our demands when he said that we wanted it doubled. They carried our banner, but even that, we had amended our banner. We wanted the shelter allowance tripled back then, last year when they carried our banner.
It's like if you lower the tide,
the thing is,
you're still drowning.
The NDP balked at doubling ODSP, and they only did because they finally relented into accepting it, and they only said that they would double it on the second year, giving them a year leeway to change their minds. Now, how are they going to react to our new demands of quadrupling the shelter allowance for ODSP and doubling? See, we want clarification between doubling what you're doubling. We want, because if you just say doubling it and you double the 1228 up to 2456 and your rent is $1,500, you're only going to have a basic needs of $950. So that's not doubling the basic needs. That's very misleading the public. That's why we clarify. So, are the NDP going to agree? See, they never said nothing about welfare.
That's not a popular enough topic. And
so we want OW increased to 150%, both the basic needs and the shelter allowance. The other thing is, we shouldn't, and nobody talks enough about that. We shouldn't have to use the basic needs allowance that we get stipulated separately on our benefit to prop up an inadequate shelter allowance. That's not right. When 91%, no, actually it's more than that, right? No, it is 91% of ODSP clients do not live in subsidized housing. So how are they making pay full rent? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's a problem. I'm going to jump into this federal thing right now because we got to.
That's a great transition. That is where I'm going next. So Rabia is definitely going to be next on the agenda because we want to hear the work around Bill C-22, and folks can be feel free to talk about
Okay,
that.
can I say what I want to say
Yeah,
about
go
it?
give us a little intro.
Okay. Well, the federal the disability benefit, they keep touting it, and they keep building up the disabled people's hypes and hopes. But oh, it's past this reading, it passed this reading. Well, you know what? There's no amount on it. Until there's an amount on it and it's voted on it, that amount is what they're gonna try to pass.
Okay, hold on.
So that's not doing anything. All it's doing is smoke screening the provincial problem, and it's giving the provincial premiers an out and to say, okay, we can wait for the federal disability benefit. We don't have to do nothing. Also, it's I lost my train of thought there.
I'll come back to you, Isabella, because you kind of fast forwarded. So I'm assuming that there's a lot of audience members that don't know what Bill C-22 is, or
suppose it cuts off at age 64. So in that case, it's not going to help anybody that's senior disabled. So it's not really, it's just going to add to the provincial. It's going to be basically the same as the provincial one. So, and if it's inadequate, it's going to mean a fight on a war on two fronts. You would have to fight with the provincial government, and they're going to say, no, it's the federal responsibility. You're going to fight with the federal one. No, that's the provincial responsibility.
Yeah, jurisdiction's definitely been brought up. So let's hold tight. Let's hold tight and explain Bill C-22 to folks at the kind of bare bones level.
It's divided the disabled community is what it's
Isabella,
done.
Let's just kind of make sure we got space. Okay. So Rabia, I know I was on the Disability Without Poverty website, and prominently featured there is the advocacy around Bill C-22. You also mentioned being on an advisory type committee for the minister for that portfolio. I will never remember all the names that they give these ministries. But can you then first give the audience an idea of what Bill C-22 is? We can always discuss, its shortfalls that Isabella's kind of brought up there, but you're doing a lot of work there. Please tell us about it.
Okay, so let me just kind of backtrack here and say, okay, so the Minister's Advisory Group, I ended up on that group as, the one racialized person with a disability that was somehow engaging in some conversations at, I was on the board of Accessibility Standards Canada and whatnot, so I was on the radar. So when COVID hit and they decided to form a Minister's COVID Disability Advisory Group, I was asked to join. I stayed on that group as things evolved for the Canada Disability Benefit. Just putting that out there. So, the advisory group came first, there to give input, critique, advice, blah 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 blah, and be aware of what's happening at the federal level. In fall of 2020, the Prime Minister made a promise and put it in the mandate letter of Minister Qualtrough. So the throne speech of 2020, Prime Minister Trudeau said, we're going to introduce a Canada Disability Benefit. And a bunch of folks on the West Coast who had been involved in disability poverty discussions and had amplified that messaging and built some sort of, network and conversations across the region said, okay, we need to pull people together, grassroots people with disabilities, and we need to start, educating people ourselves, informing ourselves from experts to get an idea of, what does disability poverty look like? What does movement building look like? What does benefit design look like? Like, what does all this mean? So we formed Disability Without Poverty and the Canada to advocate for the Canada Disability Benefit, because we said, you know what? They've dangled a carrot. And if we don't just totally chomp on that, it's not going to happen. It's going to be, it's going to just be tossed away. So we up the pressure. We start to engage around it. Canada Disability Benefit was introduced in 2021, and Parliament was dissolved. An election happened. Then we upped the pressure once another minority government emerged. We just ramped up the pressure saying, hey, Canada Disability Benefit now. We got prominent Canadians with and without disabilities to issue an open letter. The Senate included the Canada Disability Benefit as a key priority in their open letter. We did a parliamentary e-petition of, garnering about, just close to 18,000 signatures across the country,
That's impressive.
calling on government to introduce this bill. Finally, this bill was introduced last year. Yes, it is framework legislation. Absolutely does not have all the details. It's gone through the process to third reading in the House and now is sitting with the Senate. There were amendments made in the House. We saw unanimous consent by all parties to get this thing going after debate and all that kind of lovely stuff. Now it's with Senate. The problem is, if there are more amendments introduced now, it goes back to the House. We can't forget that we're in a minority government. It's better to have a framework bill than to have no legislation passed and this government fall. And then there's no guarantee that we're going to have a government that's going to emerge, that's going to be that's going to be committed to ending disability poverty, or at least, doing something about it. Something is better than nothing. So
can I jump on for one moment?
We're advocating. No, I'm going to dominate my time now. Sorry.
Okay.
So Canada Disability Benefit Bill C-22 isn't perfect. If we wait for perfect, it's never going to happen. It's targeting working age Canadians with disabilities because they are the group that get no supplement whatsoever, and provincial disability supports, like I already said, are far below the official poverty line. And people with disabilities are finding themselves in deeper and deeper and deeper poverty. That's the problem. And people who are actually living that reality of poverty will welcome any support that emerges. And we're pushing for that support to be maximum based on principles. We're pushing for this law for this bill to become law, so that then we can put pressure on for the regulations. And in the regulations, the amounts will be specified, all that kind of stuff will be done. If an amount is put in the law, that may be inadequate 5 years from now, 10 years from now. And you know what? 5, 10, 20, 50 years from now, you don't want an amount specified today that nobody's going to reopen the law and change that amount. They won't change it. And in fact, you risk that if you open up changing the legislation, that the legislation gets wiped out completely, depending on who, where the power rests in Parliament. So right now we have momentum to do something to address disability poverty. What we're encouraging is, and most people with disabilities, no, the community is not as divided as it seems, or as some would like it to seem. Lawyers have their legal opinions, and they're niggling at the details, and in the details, if we'll just delay, we'll never get the details perfect. We just need to move on, keep the pressure on, public pressure, public opinion. Things are on our side. Everything is working. We just need to keep pushing so that people who need money get the money they need as soon as actually possible. And we're pushing for that in 2023.
Yeah. Okay. The only problem is, in 2019, Justin Trudeau lowered the poverty line for seniors to make it look like he lifted them out of poverty. Last year,
but we need to get something for adults, because they're getting the least right now. Most people with disabilities
just let Rabia kind of
wait for ODSP, wait for turning 65 to get a little bit more in many cases.
No, when you get a little bit more, but your rent also goes up at the same time, so you don't get anything extra. That's a myth that you're getting more because your rent goes up from 139 to 300 and something. And
that's across the board, no matter what supplement you get. Even if you get the federal supplement, the rent will go up. That's a whole other problem that we have to work on.
Okay, we can't yell over top of one another. That's not constructive.
Let me finish what I want to say about the seniors. Justin Trudeau lowered the poverty line in 2019, for the seniors to make it look like he lifted them out of poverty. 2022, TVO puts out an episode, and it's about how all the seniors are really struggling in poverty. Okay, that's 3 years difference. So Justin Trudeau made the senior situation worse by fooling around with the poverty line. Now he could do the same thing with disabled poverty line. The seniors are struggling. I posted about this today. about the thing, and I put the 2 links on for the 2 articles, about what happened with the seniors and the poverty line, and they're still struggling. So you can't tell me the seniors are once you get 65, you get more money. This is why I'm 60. I'll be 63 this year. I was offered to get CPP 30 years ago. I turned it down. I was told to turn it down in case they found a cure. And I want to go back to work.
Isabella, I'm going to chime in here.
I never accepted it. People have been pressured into accepting it, early. And you know what? That just takes the pressure off the provincial government, that puts it on the federal government. That's all that did.
But Isabella, I think like Rabia has conceded that there are definite shortcomings. Please don't speak over.
They're never going to pass the federal the benefit because it's way too vague. And you know what? And how do you implement it? How are they going to do it? Are they going to say that, he said, oh, it's going to be a top up to the poverty line. Well, like I said, he messes with the poverty line. And if it's not enough money, after all of this, all these couple of years, 3 or 4 years, 5 years, whatever gets implemented, and it's not enough, you know how much trauma that's going to cost to disabled people? Do you know how much depression? You know how many suicides?
So what do we do? Do we just abandon it because it's not perfect? What do we do?
You know what? People should be fighting for the programs that we already have to get fixed. There's nothing.
Okay, I'm going to stop both of you. I'm going to stop both of you right now. Isabella? Okay. We have to be able to limit the amount we talk over one another, or else nobody gets heard, right? That's the kind of medium that we're using for sure. And I know this isn't a very critical discussion. It's paramount to people's survival. But Rabia, I do want to just kind of note that in the chat that we have on the on our YouTube channel, people are very critical of Bill C-22 and perhaps the hype also that's been put into it. It kind of reminds me of just like the faux excitement that builds around politicians getting us excited about like mediocre. And you've like acknowledged that like this is what you think you can get under a minority government. So like we're not going to kind of, I think there's no point in kind of hitting that. Like people need to know that Bill C-22 isn't the solution, but it is something that disabled advocates are certainly working on. And then there are definitely a large camp of people who think that a provincial focus is the only solution at the moment. And I think especially amongst the disabled community, there is finite resources and a diversity of taxes is always critical, but it becomes like, how do you prioritize those resources to certain ends? Will it be worthwhile? And those are hard calls to make. And we're never all going to agree that we're putting our energy, like right now, Kemal, I would say I am not putting my energy into that party anymore. He knows that, but I understand that he thinks he can succeed there, and I'm not going to question that. I am not going to dismiss his efforts, because if he can succeed there, it makes it easier for everyone else. And if he doesn't, he learns something and he can move on to something else. And I know that's not all your organization does, but Isabella's points are, and those sentiments are certainly shared with a lot of people, in the comments and what I've seen online. But that goes with a lot of policies. And Isabella, I would say that to you, even small successes that we can make with ODSP or other like WISE programs, basic income has been a suggestion as a solution for everyone's poverty, not just disabled folks. Those come with really inherent problems under capitalism, under neoliberal frameworks that could possibly then scale back other support services that folks rely on, or like you said, lower poverty lines, make false adjustments that make it appear that the folks are doing something. And 100% valid, because it's been echoed in the YouTube comment section as well, that there's a real emotional impact in putting your hope in something, or seeing folks putting their efforts into something that you think will fail or be a waste of time and false hope.
Here's a couple of things, right? Like when we're advocating for the Canada Disability Benefit, we're not saying stop doing the work provincially. In fact, we're trying to work province by province to make sure that provincial officials do not claw back, that they continue to do their part in reforming their programs and supports and incomes schemes and all that to better support residents in their particular province. This is meant to be a top-up benefit, because provinces will do whatever, come on, 5%. Ontario did 5%. That in reality put $5 extra in the pocket of somebody like my brother who lives in a group home. $5 extra a month. That's nothing.
The public probably thinks it was something, though, right? Like,
exactly,
without lived experience.
And that's where we need to raise awareness around it, and we need to continue working. We're working federally on the Canada Disability Benefit because it's a government bill on the table, and it's gonna move through the system whether we're pushing or not. If we're pushing, we're gonna get it to look something closer to what people want. It may not be perfect, but if we wait for perfect, we are probably risking having anything. We're not saying that seniors are not living in poverty. We're saying let's get this top-up benefit in place, and then we can continue the fight. But if we keep the fight alive and not get this bill done as law and working toward regulations, it's going to cost people their lives who are struggling in poverty right now. It's not about getting people's hopes up. It's about getting some people the supports that they need as quickly as we can. And we know it's not going to meet everybody's needs, but we're going to keep working to address disability poverty across the board, regardless of age limits. We're not saying that this is it. This is what's on the table. And there's a buy-in, there's a level of support. The NDP and the Liberals are supporting this and pushing it through. And at the end of the day, everybody stood up and supported it this far. And if we're not at the table pushing, then it might end up being a mediocre benefit that really doesn't benefit us. So we need to push to make sure that it's something near, to what we want.
I think that too speaks to, the kind of disclaimer, Rabia, that you gave when you first talked a moment ago about being on Carla. No, Isabella, you can't speak over me. Okay. No. When you were talking about being on Carla Qualtro's advisory panel for COVID, that it's a seat at the table. You are not naive to the reason you're there, to the impact you may or may not have in these spaces, but the absence of your participation would surely be less impactful, So some folks choose to stay out of spaces that they feel are not worthwhile, and that's okay. Yeah. I'm kind of spurred by the comments in the section, because I know people got their back up when you introduced yourself as working with that minister, because she has been particularly awful in terms of ableism, perpetuating the idea of jobs as being a solution. Folks in the disabled community are not a fan. So I just kind of also wanted to reiterate that you're not part of her office, nor are you advocating for her as a minister, nor can you answer for her.
Yeah, I'm there to speak my mind. And anybody who knows me knows that I diplomatically speak my mind. I don't hold back. I'm not there to kiss up to politicians. Let me put it that way. That's not my goal in life. Never has been. If people know the type of work that I do at a grassroots level to support people with disabilities,
are we going to talk about disability
to support the community that I'm around?
We're talking about people supporting.
The one piece that we remind people of is, at least Minister Qualtrough is a person with a disability. Yes, she's a person with privilege, but she is a person with a disability. She is a politician today. And I said this at our rally in Parliament Hill in October. I said, she is a politician, but her political career is going to come to an end at some point. And her career as a lawyer, as whatever she is going to involve locally, provincially, nationally, internationally. It's going to involve the community that she's connected to, and that's the disability community. So she has to do right by us. We have to have influence over her to do right by the very community that she's going to end up coming back to when her political career is over. So that's something also to keep in mind.
I think we know what I think that, first of all, the 5% increase, we used to get an increase every year. on ODSP. 5% increase, is actually only 1.25% increase for the last 4 years, which is less than that 1.5% increase we got in 2018. All right, it's not even 5%. It's a joke. That's for 4 years. It's 1.25% for each year for 4 years. All right. You know what? When the provinces ain't going to increase, we have this. We're fighting with them to increase the benefits now. Every province has got the same problem. I deal with every people in groups in every province. They're all the same problem. And you think that just because the federal benefit is going to come in, that it's going to change the provincial attitude, that they're going to start stepping up and giving more money every year?
No, we're not saying
No, they're not going to do
No,
that.
I think that goes back to what Kemal said, is that no matter who is in office, no matter what front you're fighting on,
repeating
you will
that
have to
people
do that same
support
advocacy
it's
work
not doing
constantly.
anything. Just saying that people support the federal disability benefit doesn't mean anything. You know what? It really doesn't mean anything. We can't even discuss the federal disability benefit. It's so vague. You know what?
We'll talk next year,
It's an
Isabel.
idea. It's just an idea that's floating around, and you're trying to pass an idea. But there's no concrete friggin' nothing.
We'll talk in 2024.
If there is concrete stuff out there, where is it? Why do the disabled people been hidden from?
Isabella, though, can't you, a lot of folks agree with you, and
lots of different groups.
Rabia has already conceded that it is framework legislation. So driving that point home over and over again is really not constructive. We know that. She's agreed. Everyone in the comments is not happy with Bill C-22. They don't see it as a solution. Rabia has made it clear it's a tactic they are employing to keep the discussion in the media, to keep politicians knowing that there's disabled people advocating for better. It's one of the tactics that
we understand but it's not helping.
And that is a very valid argument. That is,
helping. It's not helping, and it's not going to help people for more years. Trudeau could do the syrup like that.
Okay.
There's nothing in his last financial budget. There's nothing in his last financial budget to do with the federal disability benefit. He has no intention of doing it.
Because there's no law on the books to budget it.
Yeah.
We want the law on the books so we can push for it to be in the budget.
Yeah, but you know what? Laws, the way the politicians screw around with everything, you can make a law all you want, and Justin Trudeau can just go and change the poverty line level, and then also the next person that comes in after Trudeau can take the federal disability and trash it.
Okay, Isabella, you've kind of transitioned us into the next discussion, okay? Because
do nothing is my question. Do we do nothing then? Do we say, okay, you know what? You talked about this, it's never going to happen, hands down, we're not going to engage.
Yeah.
We fight for the provincial benefit to get increased. We need everybody to fight on the same
Nobody's telling you not to.
Okay,
this
stop.
is the division I'm talking about. This is the division I'm talking about.
There's
the people
no
that fight for
division.
the federal disability benefit won't fight for the provincial one. The
We
people who
are.
fight for the federal
Isabella,
one
you've
will
made your
not fight for
point.
the
Let other
provincial
people
one.
chime in. You
Okay,
need to let other people chime in, because I think it is perfectly clear what you are saying. We understand that you think, and that was one of my questions that we were going to pose to folks. Is the battle with provincial programs, is it federal? Is it both? Are there the resources to do both? When
it is both. It is absolutely both.
That's fair.
It has to be on all fronts.
Yeah, I'm going to see if Kamal or Christine want to just kind of chime in, just because they've not had space. Isabella, I don't have the spoons to yell over you after every question.
What are these other people doing?
One sec, Isabel. I actually have a question for anybody. So basically, in my opinion, I actually believe that what's going to happen is that we're going to have a human rights lawsuit, kind of like what happened with the Indigenous reserves. That's my belief of what's
Can you
going to
explain that a
happen.
little bit more?
Sure. So basically, okay, I don't actually know the full details, but basically what happened is that lack of access to certain resources, somebody took them to the federal government to court for not upholding their promise to Indigenous people.
So what would the lawsuit involving disabled folks be?
Well, basically, I believe that we're going to end up having human rights, I don't know if it's tribunals, but
a challenge,
a challenge, sure, at a court level
Okay.
And what my question is, will it be easier to make that like those changes if we have the framework versus not having the framework?
Well, all these people that are fighting for the federal benefit, are they also fighting for the provincial benefit just
No.
as hard? No, they're not. Okay. Now the other thing
Isabella,
is,
no,
wait,
no,
human
no.
rights. As
Kamal
far as
asked a
human rights go,
question. I'm going to
no,
boot you
know
from
what?
the meeting.
Canada
This is your
Canada has
last
been
warning.
Canada has been reprimanded
No, I don't.
by the Human Rights Tribunal.
Man, that really upsets me. I do not like removing people, but we cannot have a conversation with someone screaming over top of the other guests. That's, Isabella had some really great points to share, and all of them are valid. But I have to take control of this at some point, and I've hardly heard from other folks because of that. So, Kamal, you posed a question in terms of like a human rights challenge, and I think like it's important to note that there's like 3 levels of human rights challenges really, and they all apply to like different levels of government, but certainly precedent is important. We haven't talked about any kind of legal avenues as a means to ensure, because that is the larger question, like between the provincial avenues. The answer remains the same, that it's going to be a constant battle. Like Isabella brought up that point, that politicians will shift, parties change. Even our Health Act is just an act. The Canada Health Act is just an act that can be removed. So any efforts we do on the political front, the electoral front, are likely just as temporary. So what needs to be done? We talked about ableism so very briefly, I suppose, but it's inherent in all of our discussions here. But that is really what's stopping the attitudes changing. Right? Not enough people are making these demands, so politicians aren't acting on them. There's no value to capital in these demands, right? Capitalism does require a sub-proletariat, a class desperate, an example class. At least we are not them. So social activism, movements, large amounts of people pushing in the right direction are key, right? That's a lot of what our show Blueprints of Disruption is about. It is born from a real skepticism of electoral politics as an avenue for change, with the urgency needed, with the permanence needed. So I'd like to open it up to you folks on how we can shift attitudes. Rabia, drove home a few points to get this included, to get disability rights on more agendas, on people's radar, in the legislature, in the charter, whatever it takes. So what is that seed, or what is the kind of broader work that needs to be done so that we're not fighting on so many different fronts, sometimes ineffectively? Does anyone want to take that one on? Christine, you unmuted yourself.
Just around what you're saying around shifting attitudes. That's for me something I've tried to do, just personal, like in my personal life and stuff like that. And it's not easy at all, right? And I think what you said, Kamal, around human rights and lawsuits, that's where I think this has to go. I'm listening very closely. I've not been deeply involved at all in terms of Bill C-22. I've become more educated about that this last year through really great advocates online. The hard part, I just speak experientially. The hard part for me today is sitting at the other end after, 3 decades. There's a real benchmark with 30 years too, around systems, I hear, and I agree, because I saw the come down working in the system, right? It's so hard because hearing you know, like with somebody getting so upset and stuff, it's because, you know, being alive is being challenged, right? And now we have our government spending. I can't say, you know, how frustrated I was. I was glad to see they put the brakes on, you know, for the amendments for MAID, right? The expansions, you know, to include just mental health as a sole condition.
That 100% came from pressure from the bottom, right? Like there was a lot of buzz.
But what I'm saying, what spoke to me about that is how quickly the government was able to finally, they'd had enough, right? They got tired. We had the DW Dying with Dignity camp there. And how quickly they were to have somebody speak out, you know, have whoever he is, I can't think of his name, say, oh, we're going to put it on hold, but we're violating everyone's rights. And I'm thinking, okay, so you're really concerned and balking about this, but you've got people living here with disability on the street, for example, in a wheelchair, you know, in tents, you know, we know what's going on. I guess maybe it's a question too. I don't know what other recourse there is anymore other than very profound action and legalities, right? I reached out to Amnesty in the summer and they took it and made a file for me, and I was supposed to be a change maker and stuff. I never heard back. But they said it's a real issue, you know. Yes, we know it's an issue. We know this is a problem. But this is what I've been hearing for 30 years. And that's where I'm frustrated, because I don't want to hear anymore about, we're going to do a summit. We're going to have a focus group. We're going to do that. No, this has been going on for a long time. And it's basically an intentional stall tactic at this point. And I think, you know, unfortunately, we're a population of people, like, we know we're so diverse. If you've got people in poverty who aren't eating properly, who are trying to advocate and do activism and be heard, who are always sidelined in community, not to mention the intersectionality that comes with race and everything. And I'm not a person to speak to that, but I have an understanding from learning, right? So this is so huge. And I don't know, you know, coming from my former professional brain, I don't know anymore what to suggest. And I other than action, you know, like you say, protests and stuff like that. I've done lots of letter writing. I've done lots of committees. I've done lots of all that stuff for a long time. And here we are. And I think a lot of people feel this way, right? Who've been in these fields and also live with disability now, right? And I can't find words sometimes, I guess is my point. I appreciate you listening. I don't mean to ramble, but I would love to see human rights and accountability. And I also think, and I mean, this is going to be in time coming, hopefully, but there needs to be something in place to let the leadership know today that what you're doing right now and the people that are dying under your, I don't know what you call it, reign, it's going to come back, and there's going to be accountability around this stuff, because you do, like, I know even locally here, they ignore and have for
like
years.
Consequence, like professional political consequence.
Yeah. You know what? If you're going to work in, if you're going to work in a professional realm, or you're going to be a politician, there are going to be repercussions. You are not untouchable. So when you choose to ignore, which is what this government is doing, it's obvious, it's psychologically damaging. It's causing damage to people with disabilities, trauma, PTSD, which is all negated as well, right? So I don't see it as, we know it's not a simple solution, but I have some real issues around everything that way too myself. You know, and I've tried to pick brains of a couple of legal people as well. And there's certainly opportunity there, but I feel like like you said, we need to have more attitude shift and an unwillingness to accept ableist, race, all of it, in dialogues in our communities, with our friends, in the newspaper, online. Like, I'll throw things, and say, why are you phrasing it like that? You're making it like, oh, it's all crazy, poor disabled people that are so dangerous. We need more police. Okay. Anyway, that's my bit
That's
of a
never
rant.
the answer. We know
Right.
that.
No, I know. No, but taxes were raised. Okay.
Yeah.
That's just kind of my emotional sort of way of seeing this. And if I come at this from a perspective as having been a counselor and a therapist for so many years, I can tell you from what knowledge base I have, what's happening to people. I know what I'm experiencing myself, and I have a whole lot of privilege. So I think there needs to be accountability for this kind of abuse, which is what it is. We are being psychologically abused by our governments, and it's not okay anymore. It never was, right? So that's what I see. Just kind of the carrot and stick, right?
Yeah.
That's and as an observer, that's what I've seen. Even in all of the advocacy, everybody's doing so much profound work, and then nothing. No disability.
We're not
relief,
seeing
nothing.
a lot of movement.
Yeah, and we got 3 years since the pandemic began, and we're in 2023 now. So I still beg the question: where the hell is the disability emergency relief benefit? What happened with that? Right.
That is a question that came up in.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was in the chat a lot, especially at the mention of the minister, why relief to other people was so instant, so quick, unquestioning for most part. Everyone's always going to question something, but but for disabled folks got squat. What was it, like a $600 one-time payment?
Yeah.
And like, that's soul crushing to folks, like, and shows
people did sorry to interrupt.
That's perfectly all right. Rabia, like, I know, again, like Bill C-22 isn't everything that your group does, Disability Without Poverty. What kind of work is being done or needs to be done, maybe looking forward, to build more momentum, like quickly, like folks are, signing up for MAID in lieu of take the floor for a minute. I'm turning my camera off just for a second.
Yeah. Okay. So basically, I mean, essentially what we talked, you brought up like the one-time only emergency benefit for people with disabilities. I mean, everybody was upset. We were upset. And that's why we said we need to organize a movement for the Canada Disability Benefit, because the Canada relief, the emergency relief benefit came for workers first, which most people with disabilities didn't qualify for, came for students, came for seniors. When it came to disabled people, it got packaged in an omnibus bill. So, Minister Qualtrough, like love her or hate her, she's the one person with a disability in that cabinet. And she has the disability inclusion portfolio. Everybody else has their competing priorities. They, everybody is asking for a piece of the pie, and they're going to push for their own little agenda, even around the cabinet table. That's just the way our system works. That's how our government works. So, it became packaged in an omnibus bill. Then it was reintroduced. It took a good 8 months or more for people with disabilities to see an emergency relief benefit, $600 measly payment come through to them. And there were multiple reasons for that. And again, they needed to qualify for the disability tax credit. So there's a whole bunch of problems federally too. And if we're not at the table, those won't be addressed. And how we've been building this movement, and nowhere have we said, hey, stop doing the provincial work. Do the provincial work. We need people to yell and scream and protest and do all that kind of stuff to be heard. And we need the diplomats, and we need the silent observers, and we need the internal champions. We need everybody if we are going to disrupt the system and make that kind of historic systems change that's needed. So we brought people together. We did surveys, we did polls, we produced numerous op-eds in English and French. We did all kinds of media stuff. We got big names to co-author op-eds with us so they're heard in Ottawa. We publish all the time in iPolitics and in the Hill Times to make sure that bureaucrats and officials are reading the message that we want to send about the issues that are very real out there. all this work is essential to impact the outcomes. And the outcomes, like we said, may not be perfect, but we need to do this work. We've remained laser focused on the Canada Disability Benefit, and we're working to organize province by province. We have organizers, we're working with organizers on the ground in BC. We've done work in Alberta. We're trying to do some work to support the ODSP Action Coalition slowly in Ontario now. We're looking at mobilizing in Quebec and beyond. We have people who are doing stuff in because they're a part of us, they're connected to us, they're doing local stuff in Newfoundland. So, and we've been meeting with politicians one-to-one. We've been meeting with senators. We've invested a lot of resources, a lot of time, a lot of energy. We've gotten philanthropy on board. So the work that we're doing, we got money from private foundations and community foundations. We don't take money from government, because if we take money from government, we cannot put the pressure on government. And we've garnered friends across all parties and gotten them to speak for the Canada Disability Benefit. We have to work with the system to ensure systems change. And we have to have people from the outside also putting on their pressure the way they know how, the way they do best at all levels of government. This isn't the be all and end all of ending disability, poverty, and every other thing that impacts quality of life for people with disabilities. This is one thing in that path to helping people with disabilities thrive. And we just got to see it through. If we're not there, it's going to be mediocre. If we are there, it'll be better.
I think people think it's going to be mediocre no matter what, but I think
understand that.
Your absence is still going to be worse. And I understand. And again, on the show, we talk about the need to diversify tactics and to appreciate that we're not always going to agree on the avenues of change, but that surely many levers of power need to be pulled to get, the kind of changes that folks are talking about, to get the kind of demand. And there'll always be also two different approaches to negotiations, right? Where, I see Rabia kind of coming from we get what we can, right? Like a realist approach. And this isn't to diminish, because what Isabella mentioned, those demands, those are real demands. Those are really needed. But in the political atmosphere that we're living in, it's easy to also critique that as an impossible ask, particularly in Ontario under a Ford government. In a province where even the Ontario NDP needed to be severely pushed to go beyond a 20% increase. So, those are the realities, though, what's needed. But there's no right, there's no wrong, and it's okay to disagree with the way folks are going at it. And it is impossible to unite an entire large group of people like the disabled community that, like we said, have come from many different intersections of life, but and have different needs. So yeah, I just want to point that out. That's like to a lot of the comments that I can't incorporate from the chat because it is very active today. I do appreciate that. And I am trying to have it influence the discussion as much as possible. Kemal.
I mean, we're fighting for scraps. Like basically both sides have problems. And I'm not pointing to one side or the other, but also that, both sides have issues and nobody has the energy to be able to actually attack both because they're very different approaches. Like for me, I used to be working on federal, now I'm exclusively on provincial, and I don't think that I can do federal activism work for quite some time until it'll take an adjustment. And one other point that I wanted to make is I just wanted to say, because you did say, how are we supposed, what's the perspective we need to be giving it to legislators? And I think at best they're neoliberal. And so I will give this neoliberal perspective, which is that actually sometimes oftentimes it's more expensive to give them less, because if you're on the street, you may have to go to the hospital. If you can't eat properly, and that actually costs more. Or even if you are like able to get by because of family and friends, that's an expense on them, both in time and resources, just to get your basic needs. And so that's something which, like, those family and friends may also not already be at a position where they can provide, yet they're having to. So that actually, it is an expense on that side as well. So
I always hate when we have to bring those arguments down to the numbers. And you'll find with most conservative policies and liberal policies, bad ones, they aren't actually cost effective, right? And so making those arguments is great for voters, right? Like, voters need to understand, if you're looking at like budgets, if the deficit is something you're talking about, and this goes with homelessness as well, that it's actually way more expensive to do these Band-Aid solutions or to give people a little bit less. But I think people would argue two things. Ideologically, there's still a need to warn people that if you do not participate in the labor market, you will be punished. And I don't care if that's your fault or not. That is the reality. People outside the labor market, sex workers, the value of work that isn't paid, all of that there's an example to be made there that is not really acceptable, that one needs to sell their labor to get by and to have value. Rather than just their humanity. So those calculated arguments just aren't going to hold with neoliberals. This is part of the plan. Eugenics is the second. We now do make it cheaper, arguably, to provide less, because we've now provided the solution to end that. Like the argument that it costs a lot of money to keep someone on death row for a long time. The solution is not capital punishment. But that's essentially what we've gone to in Canadian governance, right? So although you're right, Kemal, that we are definitely spending more money by spending less, or, the calculations that you made, but the people making those decisions, that they know that. And that brings me to another question that I wanted to write, that I wrote down here. On Blueprints of Disruption, we talk a lot about the stages of movements. The environmentalist movement is the best example to explain what I'm talking about, that at some point you have to move beyond the awareness raising stage, right? Like, almost everyone knows climate change is a problem. And they know almost why it's a problem, how it's a problem, and how it can be fixed. So now it's a matter of disrupting the system until they fix it, right? It's not about convincing people what needs to be done. It's about actually getting people to do it. What do you feel the disability rights movement? I feel like it's hard to say, like, oh, we're still in the awareness raising stage, because that doesn't sound very urgent. But, town halls still need to be had. There's obviously still work to do, because people don't understand, right? Like, they don't understand how bad ODSP is. They don't understand a lot of stuff. Are we still there? Are we in a mix? If anyone wants to comment on that, because it's frustrating being stuck in the awareness raising stage and having just the appearance that folks are doing something, governments are doing something. Rabia, go ahead.
Unfortunately, when it comes to any kind of equity group and equity seeking, equity demanding work, I hate equity deserving, so I won't use that term. It's lifelong learning. You always have to raise awareness. You always have to teach people the issues, because if they're not living them, they're oblivious to them. That's just a fact. So we will always have to raise awareness and foster greater understanding of the issues amongst people who don't have the lived experience. However, that doesn't mean that that's the only place we're in. I think we're in this mixed space now, because around the Canada Disability Benefit specifically, we did some different things. We held, webinars and stuff just to inform people and have discussions, but we also, got billboards up in all major cities, and we got PSAs on radio talking about disability poverty. There was a billboard up for I don't know how long, the digital ad up at Yonge and Dundas in Toronto. or Young and Gould, wherever the billboard, wherever that digital board is. So we tried new ways to push out messaging so that the average person can know that disability poverty exists and needs to end. We did polling questions around it. So we really, tried to get those stories out into the public. And you saw more and more the impact, especially with MAID, like tying MAID and poverty together, and all the coverage that media gave to that had an impact on, what we already discussed in this group around delaying, mental illness as being the only requirement for MAID. At least that's been pushed out for greater examination now. It's not coming into effect this spring. So we've seen how effective some of that work can be.
Yeah, I think people are moved. Like even when I share tidbits with the folks in my life that I glean from talking to people, are horrified. They may not know where to start, but it is news to a lot of people. Even in the chat here, folks now living with that experience, who developed a disability. It was a learning curve. Isabella talked about, or Christine. It's been a long night.
Christine, yeah.
About navigating the process, and we don't have a lot of time left, so I do want to just kind of go back to the panel, give you guys some space to talk about. Oh, come on, I'll let you go first. Then you have your hand up, so you can tie in your comment and then go to moving forward, right? One of the questions I submitted to you folks that we didn't get to, and I know Isabella really wanted to talk about this, and she was skeptical of its effectiveness, but we had a guest on, John Clark, and he talked about organizing unemployed people around the issues related to being unemployed, specifically social safety net. And just an example that it can be done. It's not conventional, right? We think of unions and as something for the workplace, but certainly like the Najuan Support Network comes to mind. We interviewed them, and they're a union of marginalized workers, like that aren't all in one workplace. So it is possible to unionize people who are not all in the same place. More difficult, yes, right? You can't just go to the workplace, but is there value in that? Because when I first reached out, I'm like, who's fighting ODSP? And it was really, there's not that large coalition that is so obvious, like in the Ontario Federation of Labor, criticisms, we can all have them, but it's not so obvious. Like it's not, to me, as an outsider, I am disabled, but I'm not part of the activism that goes on. Can we create a network? Is there value to organizing? Because think of every person on ODSP, like what is it, 500,000? Or is it anyway, lots. There's potential there, but obviously barriers. Christine, you talked about being in rural communities, like Isabella talked about, like disrupting, but rural communities have different barriers. Being disabled has its own barrier, poverty. So yeah, just kind of check us out, folks. Take a couple minutes to talk about how you see moving forward. With that little tidbit in mind, if you think it's a silly idea, what do you think we should do moving forward? And Kemal, you go first because you had your hand up.
Yeah, and well, the good thing is that actually my answer ties the two questions together. So
perfect.
Yeah, basically, like the first thing I wanted to say is what I saw in the chat. Jay said, yeah, it's not accidental. And I like what Rabia said, that like awareness is always going to be important, but the thing is that nobody cares until it affects them. And that's why, like at the very beginning of the chat, when we were talking about John Clark, one of us had mentioned like, okay, well, they did do some work, but then somebody else had said, but only in a specific part. And we were trying to figure out, well, why was that? And it was because they didn't actually think to actually work on those topics until it actually affected them. And so that's why, like, yeah, awareness is always going to be important, because we need to make sure that people realize when they get there that they need to be working with us.
Thank you. Christine, and then we'll end with Rabia.
I really like what you, pardon me, suggested around gathering, organizing, creating a union of some sort. I'd really like to be part of that. I agree. I think we're in so many silos everywhere. And then like someone like myself with mental health advocacy, we're in another silo. You know what I mean? Like everything's so, it's nice to be able to even just have this talk tonight and have a couple of people coming together and planning, because I know I've only experienced doing the disability advocacy online for the last year, but like we need the organization. It's a lot of spinning wheels, and I care about the people that I've met and connected with a great deal too. I think we all have the same goal in mind. It's just getting there in the midst of everything that's going on, with solidarity. We can have opposing opinions or what have you. And like I said at the beginning, I don't, the conditions, like I said about social murder, and I'll leave with that, because our country, yes, there's things and there's good. Okay. There's also not good. And so the conditions are here in terms of making it so incorrigible to survive or exist, especially within legislated poverty. That's what this government is doing, and I can't see it any other way. And I really hope that, I really appreciate everything that Rabia and Kemal have said, and as well as Isabella. So thank you for having me. I really appreciate this.
Thank you for your contributions, Christine. Rabia, so, aside from Bill C-22, my friend, I think we've beat that dead horse. But there's a larger goals, right? Beyond that, where do we go?
The goal is to, help people thrive ultimately. And that means we need to remind able-bodied people that there are disabled people in their lives that they care about. It's really remarkable when you start talking to people and you make them think. They're like, oh yeah, I went to school with somebody, oh my neighbor, oh my cousin, oh my sibling. Like somebody clicks to them and it starts mattering. And then you help them think about the fact that, this is a group that they can always belong to, and these are issues that they might be faced with, and it hits them. So appealing to people's values, I inherently believe that people are good, they're not evil. So I'm the forever optimist. I always say, I see things differently. Okay. I speak my mind, because I don't see the dirty looks that people give me. So I just say what I need to say.
Well, I'm smiling.
I speak truth to power. So we need to movement build. And that's what we've been attempting to do nationally, is build a movement of people with disabilities, of their families and friends, of organizations and allies. And what we saw happen last year is we had corporate Canada engaged, a couple of big corporations, or business sector. We had unions engaged. We had philanthropy engaged, and philanthropy has not engaged in this kind of advocacy and systems change work before at this scale. And we had disability organizations, engage and share and work together. And that is very powerful. Yes, we need, the lawyers out there to remind us where the holes are, but let's not disrupt the whole process. Let's disrupt in a positive way, but we can't disrupt to completely abandon the process, because something's happening. Something's got to change. Everybody keeps talking about build back better. I talk about building forward better. We don't want to go back. We want to move ahead. We want to do things differently. And we're going to remind people to do things differently. And some of us are new kids on the block there, believing that we can do things genuinely differently and have impact. So give us a chance.
Thank you. That makes me think of Kemal and the NDP, you know, like all the power to you, friend. I want to thank everyone.
And one
go ahead.
political party is not going to make the change. Like they're not.
Thank
Anybody
you.
and everybody that gets into power gets caught up with what bureaucrats tell them. So it's also bureaucracy. It goes beyond party politics. Sorry, I'll end with that.
That's okay. No, that is an important point to make. We do make it a lot here on the show. I'm a bit of disillusioned with all of that, but you know, abandoning the fight on any front is definitely, I would never advocate for that either. I want to thank all my panelists, including Isabella Gamk, who is not here with us now. She had incredible contributions to the discussion. I wish we could have continued. I think this was valuable. We will have this content posted up, the audio, for those who like to consume that way, and also there on YouTube. So, you know, please share our content. It really does help boost our network. It's a show entirely dedicated to amplifying activism, teaching different ways to disrupt the status quo, sharing tactics, barriers, wins. And my final thoughts on this particular topic are on ableism. And the way I would kind of answer the last question that I posed there, that all the panelists definitely touched on, but it's the same it's similar to the answer to racism. It's not enough to just not be racist. There is like anti-ableist work that needs to be done in your family, at your workplace, yourself. Even disabled folks have internalized ableism. I used incredibly ableist language. I know, like, changing language isn't everything, but it's part of becoming aware of how inherent, how deeply embedded ableism is in our societies, and how capitalism absolutely requires it. They are not, it's not compatible with capitalism to be disabled. And, you know, it's not my solution to everything, but, you know, attacking that system in particular, because I believe under that system, we will forever be fighting over crumbs by design, between all the marginalized groups. So vying for attention in those intersections, and then vying for funds. And there's just never going to be enough to go around to those that need it in this current system. That's the socialist in me, obviously. That is, you know, my approach. But, you know, clearly disruption is a theme with the show, and was a theme this night, that disrupt ableism, whether that be through legislation, conversations, legal means. You know, a lot of people in the chat did advocate for legal means being the only way. So again, we're not all going to agree on tactics, but I think all of our motivations are very similar, and our vision for what the final outcome could be is very similar. So let's continue to have conversations like this, but more importantly, like, connect. So everyone you saw in the chat, like, connect with them, connect with these people, these panelists, right? Like, start to create that network of folks, so the work isn't so hard. And again, thank you again to everybody that took time to share your knowledge in the chat, here in the panel. And I really do appreciate all of your time. So thank you, and have a good evening.
Thank you so much for hosting us.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you again. So nice to meet you all.